Welcome back to It's a Complicated World After All, where we untangle the complexities of global power, governance, and shifting alliances. I'm Gabrielle.
And I'm Karen, and today we're diving into the reimagining of global governance, the rise of competitive multipolarity, and the growing fractures in the world's institutions.
And also, I'm Danita, ready to break down whatever rising powers are really changing the game or just playing by the same old rules with new faces.
With the IMF deadlocks, the WTO's paralysis, and the BRICS Plus expansion, the world is basically at a crossroads. Are we witnessing genuine institutional transformation or just a reshuffle of global power?
So, a good question, Gabrielle. For decades, the US sat at the top of the global order, but US dominance never solidified into permanent power, nor did it transition into a clearly defined new era.
Therefore, what we are seeing now is competitive multipolarity, which is just not an economic shift, but a structural and ideological battle over power, legitimacy, and authority. It is not just about who's the biggest economy, but who gets to write the rules.
And that's where global governance comes in. Institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO were built to serve certain interests. They're not neutral. They were basically designed in this post World War II world, embedding the dominance of these major powers.
So, the problem is that they're outdated and reform efforts are stuck. The IMF's voting share deadlocks and the WTO's appellate court crisis are just symptoms of a deeper problem. Institutions that refuse to evolve in a changing world.
And this is when institutions do not reform to new governance models, becoming nothing more than rhetoric and empty promises of inclusion while old power structure remains intact.
So, what about rising powers? Do they actually want to overturn the system or just carve out a bigger piece of the pie?
Realism would tell us that power transitions are rarely peaceful. Shifts in material power create security dilemmas, and the major powers resist change. The result? Systemic instability.
Exactly, Karen. Take China, for example. Some argue that the revolutionist power that wants to reshape the world order in its favor, but not all rising powers are revolutionary, as some, like India, prefer recognition within the system rather than overthrowing it.
And that's why we see this institutional stagnation. The US and Europe cling to this system built for a post 1940s world, while rising powers push to reform. The result? Governance deadlock.
Mm. So moving on to the BRICS. One of the most ambitious projects to challenge Western-led dominance is the BRICS Plus, expanding from the original BRICS countries to include new Global South members.
Great point, Karen, as it's an effort to promote global South solidarity. But there's a paradox. The more BRICS Plus expands, the more it risks losing coherence.
Right. And the BRICS Plus is both cooperative and competitive. So, on one hand, it's creating an alternative governance structure, and then on the other, internal hierarchies, especially China's economic dominance, undermines its promise of this horizontal equality.
Plus, the G7 works because its members share similar economic systems and political norms. The BRICS Plus does not. China and India have deep tensions, and African nations are still fighting for influence.
Great point, Karen. And then there's the elite capture, where BRICS Plus wants to democratize global governance. But if it just replicates the existing power structures, is it really a new system or just an old elite club?
So, if global governance isn't adapting, are parallel institutions the answer?
So this is what we call institutional bypassing. Instead of fixing old structures, emerging powers build their own systems. But does that lead to more inclusivity or just more fragmentation?
Well, some argue it's a necessity evolution, but if all institutions refuse to reform, then alternatives like BRICS Plus, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or China's Belt Road Initiative force change.
But others warn of this institutional entropy, a world where governance structures become so fragmented that global cooperation becomes impossible.
So we're already seeing this play out. The US and the EU push for a rules-based order, while China and ASEAN promote harmonious development. These norm collisions are reshaping everything from trade to technology to security.
So, where does this leave us? Can the global governance actually adapt, or are we heading towards a world with no clear order?
So some would argue that this multipolarity would actually create opportunities and it would allow governance experimentation and norm pluralism.
But then the risk is fragmentation. If no single framework holds sway, how do we govern effectively?
And most importantly, who benefits? Governance is not something that happens to us. It is something that we all shape.
So as we've seen, global governance is in a state of flux. The old order is decaying, but new alternatives are fragile.
Rising powers like China, India, and BRICS Plus want a bigger say, but without stronger institutions, governance risks becoming more fragmented, not more inclusive.
Therefore, the big question isn't who has the power, but who gets to decide the rules. And until institutions truly reform, the battle for global governance will remain a contested space.
And that's why we keep asking the tough questions, because in the end, it's a complicated world after all. And that's it for today's episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, let us know, do you think global governance can truly change? Or are we just seeing a power reshuffle? And don't forget, institutions don't just reflect power, they shape it. The question is, who's shaping them? That's all. See you next time.
Bye.